Salutations, spectacular Swift students! In this video, we'll be creating the user interface for our user to enter a review for a restaurant spot listed in our Snacktacular app. Now, most of the techniques are ones that we've already covered. We will be working with static table views, custom color sets, we'll set up programmatic segues, and we will learn a new technique for getting rid of the phantom table view cells that can show up at the end of a static table view. The reviews are in for your Swift skills. My only regret? That our app maxes out at 5 stars. Let's get cooking! Let's head to the main storyboard. Our review detail is going to be in a static table view controller, so let's add that. We'll open up the library, search for a table view controller, drag it to the right of all of our existing view controllers, let go. With the table view selected, let's head to the attributes inspector. Again, just make sure that you've clicked on the gray body inside this view controller where the table view itself is. That'll allow you to change the attributes for the table view, and you'll know you've done this right when you see the words table view at the top of the attributes inspector. We'll set the table view content type to static cells. Then we'll go down and we'll click on the first section here. You'll see it'll be highlighted in the attribute inspector. It says table view section, and it shows the attributes we can change for the selected section. The rows are currently listed as 3. Let's change that to 1. And you'll see back on the main storyboard, now there's just 1 row in the section. Then we'll click back on the table view itself, and we'll change the number of sections to 5. You can see the table view now has 5 sections, each with 1 row. Now we don't want any of these individual sections to show a selection indicator, so under selection, where it says single selection, we want to change that to no selection. Now we don't want any headers to show for the sections that we have in here. Now I'm going to go in and highlight and then delete the text inside each of these headers. These are the labels from section 1 through section 5. Xcode quirk, at least in the version that I'm using. Even though I'm deleting the headers, the main storyboard is going to show a space where I could re-enter the headers, but if there's no text in there, those gray headers go away when you build and run, and you'll see each of these sections, currently these 5 white areas, will be lined up vertically right next to each other with no gray space in between. And you'll notice that toward the end of this video when we build and run. And with the headers deleted, we're ready to work on each of the individual sections. So I'm going to zoom in, click on the first cell in the top section. I'll head to the size inspector. Let's set the row height. First, click off automatic and set the row height to 62. Then let's add our restaurant name label. So we'll click on the library. We'll drag a label over, stretch it out side to side, head back to the attributes inspector. Let's set the font to the custom font. We'll make that Avenir Next condensed. We'll set the style to bold, the point size to 24. And let's put in some placeholder text here that says restaurant name, and we'll set constraints. How about 4 top, 8 left and right, and we'll set the height to 32, add 4 constraints. Now let's add the address label right beneath that. We'll go up to the library, we'll drag a label over, stretch it side to side, we'll lower the font point size to 14, keep everything else the same, but we'll add constraints where the top's 35, left and right are 8 and 8, and we'll set the height to 17, adding 4 constraints. And let's put some bogus text in here for their address. Instead of label, we'll give the old Munster's address, 1313 Mockingbird Lane, and I don't know their city and state, but we'll say Munsterville, California, 13013. Now this second section is going to have the stars that we click on for ratings, so I'll click in the cell in the second section. Then we'll head up to the size inspector, we'll click off automatic, and we'll set the custom row height to 76. Now let's add our click to rate label. So we'll first click in the content area of this cell, click on plus, bring up the library, drag a label over, stretch it out side to side. Then with the label selected, head to the attributes inspector. We'll replace the default text label with click to rate : We'll set the font to custom, the family to Avenir Next condensed, set the style to demi-bold, keep the size at 17, but we'll set the alignment to centered. And we'll set the constraints, 0 top, 0 left, 0 right, and we'll set the height to 24. Add 4 constraints. And then our stars are going to be buttons. So we'll go up to the library, find a button, drag it just below our click to rate label. Then we'll configure this one button and duplicate it 4 times so that we have 5 rating stars. First, let's get rid of the text that says button. We'll delete that. Then let's head up to image here, and I'm going to type in star, S-T-A-R. Not surprisingly, under the system area, we see the same star symbol that we used in the previous video to show the stars in our table view cell, so select that. Now with the button selected, let's head down to add new constraints, and we'll use this to set the width and height of the button. And we'll set the width and the height to 40 each. Now we'll press add to constraints, but the button itself isn't going to resize until we set it up inside of a stack view. The button's outlined in red because it's missing constraints. Again, the stack view will take care of that, but we need to finish configuring the button and then make duplicates before we can create a stack view. Then scroll down to this view area here, and for content mode, let's select aspect fill. Then to change the size of any of the system images, the SF symbols font, we're going to go under where it says default system configuration. We're going to change the configuration so that it says point size. Then we'll set point size to 32. I experimented. I thought that was a good size. And we don't want the tint to remain this light blue. So what we're going to do is down here under tint, we'll select dark text color. Now I could have set this as a named color, a custom color that we set up in our asset catalog, like our primary color, the Snacktacular orange. The advantage of that would be if I ever decide I wanted to change the color from the dark text color, well, if it was a named color, I would just change the named color in the assets catalog, and every place where I referred to that named color would take advantage of the change I just made. Now I'm pretty confident that I want to keep the outline as dark text color. If you want to change that, feel free to experiment, but I am going to use a custom named color to create a background for some of these user interface elements. And so let's head over to the assets catalog to set up that new color set right now. Now this is going to be a very light gray that I'm going to use as the background to indicate to the user that interface elements that have this light gray background can be used to update content. Now eventually we're going to add some programmatic updates too, so that we can either remove or add this custom gray that we're about to create, depending on whether the user interface element will allow updating or not. And again, not to overload you with information right now, but that's actually going to depend on the user. So for example, you're going to be able to edit your own review and delete your own review. In that case, we'll have the background as gray around the little stars. But if you're looking at somebody else's review, you're not going to be able to make those changes, so we'll get rid of the gray and we'll do that all programmatically. And we'll also learn how to draw a very faint outlined frame around this as just another visual cue. Right now, all we want to do is create that custom color that we're going to use for the interface element background. So in the assets catalog, go down here and click on plus, then select new color set. This white square will show up labeled universal. Select the square, then click the downward pointing arrow. That'll open up the attributes inspector for the assets catalog. I'm going to go underneath this color area here and I'm going to click on show color panel. If you're not already looking at the colored pencils, or I like to call this the crayon box, you can show it by clicking on the icon in the top toolbar. The color I'm going to select is in the top row, second from the right. If you hover over it, it'll say Mercury. That's this very light gray. I'm going to go down here to opacity, and I'm going to set that to 50%. Opacity is like your alpha property. Remember, an alpha 1 is completely opaque. Opacity 100% is the same thing. By setting it to 50, we're going to make it 50% see-through. That'll give us the effect of taking this already light gray and making it even lighter. I'm going to close the color panel. I'm going to double click on the word color in the area of my assets catalog on the left, and I'm going to rename color UI element background. You can call this whatever you want, but I think that's probably a good name because it describes what it is and where we're going to use it. Now let's head back to our main storyboard. Make sure that you've clicked on this button, head to the attribute inspector, and if you scroll down, you'll see under the view area, you can see the selection for background. That sets the background color. Just click in there, and we're going to change default to our new UI background color. The change is super subtle, but you'll notice it when the app starts running. Now that the button is configured, I'll click it, press Command D to duplicate it, position it to the right, then do a selection rectangle to select both of these buttons, Command D to duplicate. I got two more buttons, move those to the right, click on one button, Command D, move that over to the right, you got 5-star buttons. Now I'm going to click on these buttons one at a time, and I'll set the tag attribute on each of these buttons from 0 through 4. Then I'll draw a selection rectangle around all 5 buttons, go to the lower right-hand corner and select the Embed In icon, select Stack View, and hey, we see our buttons have resized to 40 by 40. Stack View allows those constraints to become active. Nice. Now with your Stack View selected, under the Attributes Inspector, just make sure that your spacing is set to 2. If not, make that change now. Now I want to position the stack view. Pro tip, if you want to make sure that you've selected the stack view and not any of the elements inside of it, it's best to click the stack view in the document outline. Now I can move my cursor on top of the stack view. The white glove lets me know it's okay to click and drag. And I'm just going to position this so that it's centered horizontally in the table view row. Then with the stack view still selected, I'll add new constraints. I'm going to accept the current width and height of 208 by 40 and add 2 constraints. Then I'm going to add a UI view behind the stack view containing the 5 buttons. And this is going to make it look like the stack view and the stars are on top of this view. I'm going to make this background view 4 pixels wider than the stack view and center it so that the background view is 2 pixels bigger on each side. And we'll do this because in a future video, we'll programmatically add a border to this background view to let the user know that they can click on the star buttons and change the rating. ratings. If the user can't change the ratings because they're looking at somebody else's review, we'll make sure that there's no border around the background view that surrounds the stars. Again, a nice visual cue letting the user know that the buttons can't be clicked while still looking at the reviewer's star rating for that restaurant. So I'm going to open the library, search for a UIView, and I'm going to drag it over so that it's inside of my table view cell. Make sure you don't drop it inside of the stack view, so you want to avoid the buttons, and you'll know you've got it in the right place when the plus sign shows up and the background of the entire table view cell is highlighted. So I'll release. This view doesn't have the dimensions I want, so I'll go up to the size inspector, and I fiddled with the dimensions a bit. So first I set X and Y to 0 and 0, and the width to 212 and height to 44. But now let's look at the document outline, and I'll collapse the stack view so that you can see this better. This new view that we've added is listed underneath the stack view. Remember we mentioned in an earlier video that the topmost items in the document outline hierarchy are actually the items furthest behind in the layout of the view controller, and that's why you can see that the view is obscuring a portion of the stack view and the star buttons, because according to the hierarchy in the document outline, the view is listed below the stack view, but that actually means that it's on top of the stack view. So to make sure that the view shows up behind the stack view, I'm just going to click on the view and drag it and place it just above the stack view. See this blue line that shows up just above the stack view? That's where the view is going to go, so I'll release, and we see the view is no longer covering the stack view and the star buttons. Now let's get the placement and dimensions of this view just right, so make sure that you've clicked on the view. Let's head up to the size inspector, set X to 81, Y should be 27, width will be 212, height will be 44. Then while the view is still selected, let's go down and add new constraints. We'll set the top to 3, that's 3 from the click to rate label above it, and we'll click to keep the width and the height at 212 and 44, add 3 constraints. Then we'll click on the align icon and center this horizontally in the container, add 1 constraint. And we're missing a few constraints on the stack view, so click on the stack view, let's add new constraints. We'll set the top constraint to 5. Again, that's in relation to the bottom of the click to rate label, add 1 constraint. Then we'll click the align button, and we'll center the stack view horizontally in the container too. Add the constraint. We're looking good. If you want to verify everything is constrained properly, you can click on View As, take a look at things on the first generation iPhone SE. Things center properly, nothing is overlapping, perfect. We'll go back to a larger iPhone. And now let's add our custom UI element background to our new view. So make sure that you've clicked on that view that's just above the stack view. We'll head to the Attributes Inspector, and under Background, we'll select UI element background as the background color. This is nice. Now in the third section, let's add our review title. First we'll add a static label for the review title. So we'll open up the library, grab a label, drop it into the row in the third section. We'll change the default text to review title, : We'll set the font to custom, the font family to Avenir Next Condensed, the style to demi-bold. We'll keep the size at 17. I'm going to set the font color to dark gray color. Again, if you think that you might be changing these colors, a better practice would probably be to create a custom color and then use this for all of your labels, but I think this shortcut will be fine for us. Now let's add new constraints, and we'll set these top 12, left 8, and we'll keep the width and height at 82 and 24 and add 4 constraints. Now we need a text field where the user's going to type in the review title, so we'll head up to the library, grab a text field, drop it to the right of the review title label, stretch it out from end to end. For placement text, I'll just put in title of review. We'll keep the font as a system font, but we'll set the style to semi-bold. We'll change the size to 20 points. Now we'll also set the return key to done and auto-enable the return key. And we'll eventually code this up so that you can quickly type in a review title and press the done key on the keyboard to save it. Below that, we'll set the background color to our custom UI element background, and we'll constrain this top 5, left 3. That's in relation to the right side of the review title label. We'll constrain the right side at 8, height 34, and add 4 constraints. Then in the section below this, we're going to add the body of the review itself. So click to select the table row in the 4th section, then head up to the size inspector. We're going to click off automatic, and we're going to set a custom row height to 278. We're going to add a static label that says review, so open the library, drag a label over, head to the attributes inspector, set the text to read review : The font and color are just like the label above, so that's going to be custom font, Avenir Next Condensed, style demi-bold, the size will remain at 17. We'll set the text color to dark gray color, and we'll constrain this 12 from the top, 8 from the left, and we'll set the width and height to 51 and 24 and add 4 constraints. That looks good. Now let's add a label to show the date when this review was posted. We'll go to the library, we'll grab a label, we'll drag it to the right side of the cell we've been working on, stretch out the label, right justify the text, and we'll put in some bogus text. How about posted, December 32nd, 2100. Then we'll set our font. It'll be a custom font, Avenir Next Condensed, italic style. We'll keep it at 17 points. Then add new constraints, top 12, right 8, and the width will be 175, the height 21, add 4 constraints. And since reviews will be multiple lines, we're going to add a text view under this. So open up the library, search for text view. Let's add this just below the label that says review. Then let's add the constraints that'll resize it. We'll set top to 3, left and right each to 8. We'll set the height to 240 points and add 4 constraints. Looks good. And I'll head up to the attributes inspector and get rid of the lorem ipsum and just put in bogus text. Your amazing review of awesomeness will go here. Hope it helps all of your app users to find the most scrumptious eats. Then we'll scroll down and we'll set the background color to our custom color UI element background. Nice. Now I'll zoom out and I want to get to the last section, but we can't see it inside of the view controller in our main storyboard. So how do we get to it? Well, if you just click somewhere in your view controller and then you use 2 fingers to push up, the contents of the view controller will scroll up and you can see our last section, section 5. Now let's click plus to open the library, search for a button, drag it right into the center of section 5. We'll change the title of the button from button to delete review. We'll click to change the font attributes. The only thing that we're going to change is the style, which we'll set to bold, but let's change the text color to system red color. Now let's add new constraints. We'll constrain at 8 from the top. We'll set the height to 30 and we'll set the width to 190. Add 3 constraints. And the horizontal red line shows up because we don't have an x-axis constraint, so we'll click on Align and center horizontally in container, add 1 constraint. Our button width resizes and the error goes away. Now most of the time this button should not show. We're going to programmatically show the button only if the user is looking at a review that he or she posted. Only then should you be able to delete the review. So in order to make sure the button is hidden initially, we'll scroll down in the attributes inspector for the button, and in the view area you can see that there's a checkbox for hidden. Make sure that's checked. You'll see the button becomes a little bit transparent, almost as if the alpha property has been set to 0.5. That's just Xcode's way of showing on the storyboard that the button is hidden. If we built and run right now, we wouldn't see the button at all. In a future video, we'll learn to detect the conditions where we want to show it and how to make sure that it's not hidden anymore. We can do a quick check of the interface by clicking on View As and looking at things on a smaller iPhone. We can scroll up and down. Everything looks like it's laid out properly. We'll go back to the larger iPhone. Nice work. Now that we've got this view controller set up, let's embed it in a navigation controller. So I'm going to click on the view controller's dock, then select the Embed In icon in the lower right-hand corner. Select Navigation Controller. I'll position the Navigation Controller above and in between the Spot Detail View Controller and our new Review View Controller. Then I'm going to create the segue that we're going to use when we add a new review. Now, I'm not going to click that from the review button because we're going to call this segue programmatically. In a future video, what we'll do is we'll make sure that we've saved the spot first before we can add a review. And only if the spot has been saved will we allow the segue to happen. We don't want you to be adding a review to a spot that doesn't exist. So what I'll do is I'll control drag from the yellow ball and the spot detail view controller up to the new navigation controller, and I'll select present modally. Now let's add the identifier for this segue. So click the circle that's in the center of the segue line that we just drew. And up in the attributes inspector, we'll give the identifier the name add review. That's one word, upper camel case. Now we don't want this overlay style that shows the black gap at the top of the view controller, and I can get rid of that by selecting presentation style and setting this to full screen. And we can see the overlay style goes away. We're now showing full screen. Click on the navigation bar in the navigation controller we just added. We also want to set the bar tint color to our primary color, our Snacktacular orange. Then under title text attributes, we'll set the title color to white color. And then down below in these attributes inside of the view area, we'll set the tint to white color as well. And again, it probably would have been smarter to use a named color for this, but I don't think we're going to change it from white. Now let's create the segue that's going to go from our review cell to the new review view controller that we just created. So in the document outline under Spot Detail View Controller, I'm going to find the review cell. And let me take a minute to position so that you can see both Spot Detail View Controller and our new Review Table View Controller. Then control drag from our review cell over to that new table view controller, let go, and under Selection Segue up top, select Show. Now let's give the segue an identifier, click the circle on the line we just drew, then in the Attributes Inspector for identifier, call this Show Review, one word, upper camel case. Then in the Review Table View, click on the navigation item that's in the navigation bar. Then in the Attributes Inspector under Navigation Item, make sure that you've clicked to select Left Item Supplement. That's going to include the back button. Anytime we arrive in this view controller from the Show Review segue, that's when we click on a table view cell, and that's what we want. Then click on the little yellow ball in the dock. Then under bottom bar, we're going to select none. There should be no bottom bar or toolbar in our Review Table View controller. Then let's add 2 bar button items in the navigation area at the top of this view controller. Open the library, find a bar button item, drag it over to the left. And I'm just double checking my segues here. You can ignore that, but do click on the Library Plus button, find a bar button item, and drag this one over to the right. Then set this bar button item system item to save, and then click back on the one on the left and set that system item to cancel. Now we need a Swift file for that review table view controller that we just added. So let's put that underneath Spot Detail View Controller. I'm going to right click on that. I'm going to select New File, Cocoa Touch Class. Next, we're subclassing UI Table View Controller, so make sure that you've got that in there. Don't leave the subclass of UI Table View Cell in there. You definitely want to make sure this is a UI Table View Controller, and we'll name the class Review Table View Controller. Click Next, click Create. Then we can get rid of just about all of the extra code that's in here, except for our view did load, which should just have a super view did load in there, but that's it. You can highlight everything after view did load just before the very last curly in the class. You might want to pause and compare this with what you've just created to make sure that you've got the right number of curlies and that they all match up. Now let's head over to the main storyboard and set our new table view controller's identity to the Swift file we just created. So in our new table view controller, click the yellow ball in the dock and head up to the identity inspector and set the class to our new review table view controller file. You can now see that the document outline refers to the review table view controller, and if you hover over the little yellow ball in the dock of this view controller, it says review table view controller. Nice! Now we're ready to add our IB outlets and our IB buttons, so click on Review Table View Controller, Option click on Main Storyboard so that we're side by side in Assistant Editor mode. Then I'm going to control drag each of these items over, so first the Cancel button, I'm going to refer to that as Cancel Bar Button. Under that the Save button, which I'll call Save Bar Button. Then for this label that says Restaurant Name, I'm going to call that Name Label. The address label below that, I'll call Address Label. Now for this label it says Click to Rate, I'm going to call this Posted By Label. And the reason for that is we will eventually programmatically change what this says. If you're looking at a review that was posted by somebody else, it will show the name of the person that posted this. However, if you're posting a new review, we'll leave the text Click to Rate in here. Then we also want to create an IB outlet for the view that's in the back of the stack view that holds the star button items. In the document outline, that's where you want to select it. It's listed as the view that's just above that stack view. And when we control drag over, we'll call that Buttons Background View. Then the text field that says Title of Review should be called Review Title Field. Below that, we're going to grab this field that says Posted On, and we're going to refer to that as the Review Date label. The text view that contains the review information is going to be called Review Text View. And our hidden Delete Review button on the bottom will be called Delete Button. Now we're going to add a couple of IB actions for this text field up here that has Title of Review in it. We'll put the stubs for the actions in here now, but we'll put off coding them for a future video. Now this first one will eventually be used to enable or disable the Save button, depending on whether or not a review has a name, so we won't allow any reviews to be saved if they don't have a name. So control dragging over, this first one we'll call Review Title Changed, set the type to UI text field, and set the action to Editing Changed. Now this next button is going to allow us to associate an action with the press of the Done button on the virtual keyboard. So this action will be called Review Title Done Pressed. The type is a UI text field, and the event is, this is important, Primary Action Triggered. That means the user has clicked the Done button. Next, we'll create an action for the Delete button called Delete Button Pressed. Set the type to UI button, and we'll create one for the Cancel button called Cancel Button Pressed, and one for the Save button called Save Button Pressed. When I create a lot of actions and outlets like this, I always move my cursor up the gutter area where the line numbers are, hovering over the filled in circles and double checking to make sure that the correct user interface element is highlighting on the main storyboard, showing that it's properly connected to that action or outlet, and everything seems to be checking out. I'm going to click on the X and get rid of the main storyboard. And our cancel button here is going to use the same code that we have over on our Spot Detail View Controller. So I'll click on Spot Detail View Controller. I'll highlight the function, leave View Controller, copy it with the Command C, head back to Review Table View Controller, and I'll paste this function in right under View Did Load. And I'll also head down in Cancel Button Pressed and make sure that I make a call to leave View Controller. Now let's write the code to segue to this view controller. We're going to do that inside of Spot Detail View Controller. So click that, and we're going to need an IB action for our review button. We don't have that yet, so why don't we option click on Main Storyboard to get into the side-by-side Assistant Editor mode. Then in Main Storyboard, I'm going to click on our review button. That's this button with the star that's on our Spot Detail View Controller. And control drag, and I'm going to let go just below the IB action for Location Button Pressed. I'll call this action Rating Button Pressed. I'll set the Type to UI button and click Connect. And I can click the X in the upper left-hand corner of the main storyboard to get back to the standard editor. Then in the IB action that we just created for rating button pressed, I'll put in a comment that says to do, eventually check if spot was saved. If it was not saved, save it and segue if the save was successful. Otherwise, if it was saved successfully, segue as below. Then to segue over, we'll just say perform segue, open parens, select this option with identifier. That string parameter is the segue that we're about to call, so in quotes that will be add review, one word, upper camel case. The sender will be nil. And now let's scroll up to view did load, and we're going to write some code to hide the keyboard if the user is tapped outside of the field. Now this is the same 3 lines of code we've used in other apps, starting off with WordGarden, so if you wanted to, you can open WordGarden and copy the lines of code I'm about to type in, but in either case, I'll enter these lines right now. Let tap equals, and then it's UI tap gesture recognizer, open parens, select the option with the target and the action. We'll set our target to self.view. Our action will be $selector, open parens, UIView dot end editing, then open parens, underscore colon, close parens, and there should be 2 more close parens after this. Then underneath this we'll say tap dot cancel touches in view equals false. And then finally we'll say self dot view dot add gesture recognizer, and in parentheses we'll pass in tap, that gesture recognizer we just created. Now I'll set my simulator scheme and build and run. No errors. Hammer time! Here comes our app. You can click on any of these cells. This is what we created as of the last video. A scrollable table view with a table view header. Nice. But I'm going to click on this start rating button and hey, we segue up from the bottom. That's our present modally segue. This is the new review table view controller that we just created. The interface looks magnificent. You can see you can sort of scroll and you get the bouncing effect that indicates that this view controller would be scrollable if we were on an iPhone that was too small to show all of these elements. Let's cancel and go back. Now I'm going to tap on one of these table view cells, and again we segue over, but this time it's the show segue. Now there's still quite a bit of UI work that we need to do. For example, we don't want the back button and the cancel and save button all showing up at the same time in our navigation item. We'll set that up though in a later video after we get our reviews to save and load. But this back button works nicely. There's one more thing we want to fix, and we'll offer that up as a pro tip. In the example on the left-hand side, not sure if you can see, but we've got these very faint lines. It almost makes it look like there are phantom cells with nothing in them showing at the bottom of our table view controller. I don't want to see those guys. I didn't put those in there. How do I get rid of them? Well, the solution is really easy. All we need to do is add a blank view inside the table view. After all of the sections, that creates a table view footer. See, in the earlier video, I told you we'd have a table view footer. That's what I've done over here on the right. And you can see we don't have any of those phantom ghost lines. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. So first, let's open the library. I'm going to search for UIView, and I'm going to grab this view, and I'm going to drag it over into the table view area over in the document outline. Now, it's a little difficult to place, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it go above all of the table view sections, but inside of the table view. Then I'm just going to click on this view again, drag it. Now, it's a little bit easier to place just below the last table view section. See that little line that's showing up there? I'll let go, and I've got my empty view at the end of my table view, and that's a footer inside of the table view, and I can tell it's inside of the table view because the view is indented at the same level as all 5 table view sections. If you wanted to, you could set the dimensions of this view so that it has a height that's only 1 pixel big. We don't need to do that. I'm going to click on build and run. Let's see if we got the effect we wanted. I'll click on Pino's Pizza, click one of these bogus reviews. I segue over, and hey, I don't have the lines at the bottom of this view controller anymore. The pro tip worked. Swifter, unfortunately there's no shortcuts in setting up user interfaces, but your user interface is starting to look good, and then the next video, we're ready to start saving and then loading our restaurant reviews. Keep at it!